Vladimir Putin believes that every challenge that Russia faces in the Ukraine war has a simple solution: throw more soldiers at it. Since he launched his invasion, Putin has benefited from a manpower advantage over Ukraine, and he has used that advantage to churn through troops that whittle away at Ukraine's defenses. About Russia's enormous casualty rate, which Ukraine's Ministry of Finance says has exceeded 1.18 million soldiers. However, these losses may not be the biggest manpower problem that Putin now faces, as a trio of other issues has arisen. Russia's military has massive soldier problems, and it's about to get worse when those soldiers come back home. The first of these problems will infuriate Putin. The soldiers from whom he expects unwavering loyalty are actively trying to avoid service. On December 10th, UNN published a report in which it revealed that members of the Artesh partisan group, which operates in Russia and occupied Ukraine to support Ukraine, had discovered something fishy going on at a military hospital in Kherson. Specifically, that hospital had seen a huge influx of soldiers, all from Russia's 205th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade. All the troops being admitted cited old injuries or illnesses so they could get hospital beds, and Artesh says there's a clear reason why: these soldiers don't want to fight Putin's war. UNN says that this spike in supposed illnesses and injuries uncoincidentally comes as rumors of the deployment of troops from Kherson into Pokrovsk have spread among the 205th Brigade. Russia's soldiers don't want to fight in Pokrovsk. Though Russia seems to be on the verge of capturing the city, as many as 100,000 of its soldiers have been killed or injured in 2025 alone to facilitate that capture. Plus, those who head to Pokrovsk now and somehow manage to survive know that more fighting awaits them. The rest of the Donetsk fortress belt still needs to be toppled, as you'll learn if you watch our video covering that very subject. The increase in entire groups of soldiers suddenly suffering from injuries, and even appealing when they're told they're fit to return to the fight, is unsurprising when considered in that context. Those soldiers are looking for any excuse they can find to dodge rotation, and in doing so, they're actively attempting to disobey direct orders being issued by Putin and his military cronies. Partisans emphasize that servicemen are increasingly declaring their unwillingness to go to the front and are looking for any way to evade, UNN reports. And the soldiers in Kherson aren't the only ones looking for ways out. Feigning, or in many cases inflicting injuries on themselves, has become a common practice in the Russian military ever since Putin launched his invasion. Though the soldiers in Kherson don't appear to be willing to hurt themselves to get out of duty, other soldiers have been doing just that for years. As far back as August 2022, International Business Times reported on comments made by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, which took to Facebook to explain this increasingly common tactic. Russian occupiers suffer losses, are demoralized, and look for any opportunity to avoid hostilities. They try to fake a light wound, resort to self-mutilation and various simulations. There is an increase in cases of sabotage of officers' orders, especially when it concerns offensive actions, the General Staff claimed. The longer the war goes on, the more this stays the same. Injury for an escape from the fighting has become as much of a Russian tactic as its mindless meat grinder assaults against Ukraine's defenses. A little over a year after the International Business Times report, Business Insider revealed that some of Russia's soldiers were going further to guarantee time spent in the sickbay rather than in the trenches. The outlet claimed that rumors had started circulating about exhausted Russian soldiers sticking their hands out of trenches and foxholes in the vague hope that a Ukrainian bullet would hit them. These deliberate bids to get injured make for a trade-off. A Russian soldier may lose the use of a hand forever, but with that hand gone, they can no longer hold a rifle or carry supplies, making them useless to Putin and his military. That's the theory, at least. In practice, Putin has demonstrated that injuries, real or otherwise, are rarely enough to save Russia's soldiers from their frontline fates. Sending the wounded back out to fight has become as common a practice as getting wounded to avoid the fight, it seems. Since at least October 2024, Putin has been sending injured and disabled soldiers to fight in Ukraine. That's according to a Medusa report dating from that month, in which it tells the story of a Russian soldier named Andrei. The Russian soldier tells the story of how he was injured and what Russia's response to that injury was. "We went on the attack near Bakhmut, a tank fired at us, and a piece of shrapnel broke my collarbone," Andrei says. "Then, when they started finishing us off, another piece hit my right eye and burned my retina. Now I can only see a black spot. Such devastating injuries, especially one that affects eyesight to such a degree, should be enough to see a soldier pulled from active duty." For Andrei, though, his decision not to extend his contract with the military unit that led him to that predicament didn't save him. The former convict, who had enlisted to get out of a prison term for carjacking, signed a contract with the Russian Defense Ministry on the assumption that his eye injury would keep him away from the fighting. Andrei was wrong. "They didn't give a damn about my vision," Andrei claimed. I actually asked to be a driver, but they made me a rifleman grenadier instead. They said, "You'll figure it out. You'll learn to shoot with your left eye." Andrei never learned how to aim using his one working eye. Somehow, he managed to survive his time in the war. Andrei is far from the only wounded soldier that Russia has redeployed. In December 2024, the Moscow Times reported that injured soldiers were being sent back to the front lines long before they had completed their medical treatment. The same goes for ill soldiers. "They won't let us finish anything," one Russian soldier claimed. "They send a lot of people with hepatitis. Do they want the army to be infected or what?" A couple of months later, CNN shared a video reportedly shot by one of Ukraine's reconnaissance drones that showed Russian soldiers hobbling along on crutches while in active combat zones. The Russian soldiers in Kherson may be trying to disobey Putin with their fake injuries. However, the suspiciously long hospital stays aren't likely to prevent them from being rotated to Pokrovsk. At best, they manage to avoid the rotation for a couple of weeks, but they will be sent in the end, injured or not. This complete disregard for the health of its soldiers is likely why Russia is dealing with a major desertion issue. In April, the Barents Observer noted that thousands of Russian soldiers had fled the war that Putin started. Over 50,550 cases of refusal to serve, which includes unauthorized absences, were reported in Russia's southern military district alone in 2024, as those who can't get out of the fighting by being or pretending to be injured look for other ways to escape Putin's orders. However, desertion is a very dangerous game that these soldiers are playing, and it brings us to the second of the trio of soldier issues that Putin is facing right now. Russia has soldiers on the front lines who outright refuse to fight, and it is brutalizing them in response. On December 10th, the Kyiv Post reported on what it dubs the basement of refuseniks, which is a term it uses to label Russian soldiers who have been imprisoned in occupied Ukraine due to their refusal to follow Putin's orders. These soldiers aren't faking injuries. Instead, they're outright saying no to their orders, be that due to fear for their own lives or because they don't agree with what Putin is doing in Ukraine. Russia has developed a terrifying way to deal with these soldiers, with the occupied region of Mariupol lying at the heart of its solution. There, the Kyiv Post explains, Russia has been keeping soldiers who refuse to follow orders in the basement of an abandoned construction site, where those soldiers are beaten and treated worse than cattle for their supposed crimes. The irony is that this underground dungeon is located in a village called Melakino, which has long been a vacation resort due to its being a coastal village on the Sea of Azov. What was once a joyful location has been turned into the site of abject horrors committed by Russia's soldiers against their own comrades. The Kyiv Post reports on comments made by a former Melakino prisoner who uses the assumed name Yegor Karin. Darkness, gloom, no air, damp, cardboard boxes, pallets, bottles are the words that Karin uses to describe his former prison, in which he says that the Russian military often stashes its rule breakers for as long as a year. Those who left their unit without leave, deserters and non-deserters, they put them all there, Karin adds. Another soldier, using the pseudonym Yuri Chiplakov, claims that this tiny basement was once home to 98 people who had to sleep in shifts, presumably because there wasn't enough space for all 98 of the imprisoned to lie down. Yet another former prisoner, who uses the moniker Stanislav Kozlovsky, adds, "It always stinks terribly there. They keep you like cattle or worse." He also revealed that it's not just those who attempt desertion who end up in the Melakino basement dungeon. Soldiers who are disabled, mentally ill, or who fail to pass their military medical exam are often sent in as punishment. We mentioned earlier that a soldier being injured or ill isn't enough for Putin to pull that soldier away from the front. It appears that it may be enough to get that soldier sent to a nasty basement prison in which it's very possible that they will die. The craziest thing about this tourist-turned-torture site is that the tourism hasn't actually ended. Russia is still trying to use Melakino as a vacation hotspot, even as the Ukraine war rages. Detainees are forced to work on the village's shattered infrastructure to earn better treatment, United 24 media reports. The Kyiv Post adds that prisoners are only allowed to go to the toilet in a nearby sanatorium once per day, and only at times when they will be out of the sight of tourists milling around in the village. The very existence of this makeshift prison demonstrates that Russia has more than just problems with soldiers who fake injuries and illnesses. It has enough soldiers who refuse to follow Putin's orders that it has to find unique and ever more brutal means of punishing those soldiers to dissuade others from following in their footsteps. Think again if you believe that this is a problem limited to Mariupol. In Donetsk, an entire unit of Russian soldiers recently refused to go on an assault, much to their commander's ire. You can find out more about that unit and what such refusals could mean for Putin in our video. A dingy basement prison is far from Russia's only response to soldiers who don't do what they're told. As The Guardian revealed in an October report, some of Russia's commanders don't even bother with imprisonment. Their favored punishments are sending their soldiers out on suicidal operations, or if they can't even be bothered to do that, they execute the soldiers outright. The Guardian draws from an investigation conducted by Vestka, which is an independent news outlet that gathered testimonies from Russian soldiers and relatives of dead soldiers, in addition to drawing from official complaints and video records. The outlet claimed to have verified at least 150 deaths at the hands of commanders using these methods, though it's likely that the true tally is far higher. Some commanders even appointed execution shooters in their units to mete out punishments to those who disobey or otherwise fail them. Other soldiers who disobey but aren't executed are punished severely. Troops who disobeyed orders were reportedly thrown into pits covered with metal grates, doused with water and beaten for hours or even days, The Guardian states. The investigation found that in some instances, they were forced to fight each other in what witnesses described as gladiator-style battles to the death. A medieval response to a very modern Russian military problem is far from a solution to Putin's problem of troops disobeying their commander's orders. But this type of brutality isn't a failure of the Russian army. It's a feature, one that is designed to instill a survival of the fittest mentality in soldiers who have to mold themselves into unfeeling beasts in order to survive. And it's here where we see the third in the trio of Putin's personnel problems. What happens when soldiers who have been exposed to such rampant brutality eventually return home? This is a question for which the Kremlin has no good answer, at least when it comes to transitioning those soldiers back into civilian life. Instead, the answer can be seen in the exploits of some of the soldiers who have already returned to Russia. What those soldiers are doing is just the tip of the iceberg of a problem that's going to get a whole lot worse, regardless of who wins the war. Russia's returning soldiers are killing and wounding everyday people on a terrifying scale. That's according to a December 9th report by United 24 Media, which shares information gathered again by exiled Russian news outlet Vestka. It claims that Russia's returning soldiers have killed or injured over 1,000 people since the war began. Not all of these deaths and injuries have been caused by former soldiers flying off the handle and inflicting the brutality they've seen on the people that Putin is trying to shield from the effects of the war he started. United 24 Media says that at least 551 people have died as a result of incidents involving Ukraine war veterans, and around half, or 274 of those victims, were outright murdered. Another 163 died after suffering severe bodily harm, making a total of 437 dead due to deliberate violence. Of the rest, 78 died in road accidents and 36 passed away due to other criminal cases, often involving drugs. The violent killings are less surprising than the road accidents and other criminal enterprises. Those latter two issues hint at the returning soldier problem being far more complex than a few twisted soldiers coming back and bringing the brutality of the war to bear on their own people. Drug-related offenses in particular suggest that some of Russia's soldiers are losing themselves to substances, perhaps in an attempt to escape what they've seen or to supplement their income now they're no longer on the lucrative Russian military payroll. Keep that point in mind, we'll return to it in a moment. Another interesting fact from the United 24 Media report is that many of the deaths and injuries caused by Russia's veterans are inflicted by those who were prisoners before they signed up to fight in Ukraine. These criminal conscripts have killed 163 people and injured 252 victims since returning, adding yet another layer to the soldier problem that Putin faces in Russia's future. The short-sighted decision to offer convicts freedom from their sentences in return for time spent fighting in Ukraine is going to hurt Russia massively in the coming years. Putin is very aware of what awaits his country when those former prisoners come streaming back, as Australia's ABC News reported in October. The outlet says that up to 180,000 of the Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine have been pulled from the gulags, and most of them won't be going back to their cells when they return. They're already being let loose on the streets, and there are many tens of thousands more yet to return. The outlet also reports on comments made by a Russian security affairs expert named Mark Galeotti, who says, "Indeed, Moscow's decision to enlist convicted gangsters, murderers, rapists, and similar serious criminals on a mass scale will ensure that the impact at home will be unusually disruptive." The deaths being caused by these returning prisoners are already proof of that, and it seems likely that many more will die when the bulk of Russia's convict army comes back home. Even if we take the potential actions of convicts out of the equation for a moment, it's not like that Russia can expect its soldiers to come back and immediately assimilate back into civilian life. We mentioned money as a potential issue a moment ago, and Reuters highlighted why that issue will exist in a September report. The outlet points out that an army recruit contracted in Moscow can make as much as $65,000 during their first year of service. The sum likely increases if they sign on for more years, and that annual salary is in addition to the $24,000 upfront signing bonus. That bonus alone is roughly equivalent to the average salary in Russia's capital city. meaning it's likely higher than the average for many regions outside of Moscow. When Russia's soldiers return, they'll be coming back to a country in which they can't earn anything like this amount of money again. Mix that reality with up to 180,000 convict troops serving in Ukraine, and many others who have been twisted and traumatized by the brutality they've seen while serving Putin, and you get a combustible recipe that is likely to lead to future problems with crime. Where is a former soldier to turn when the money runs dry and they can't earn as much as they did when they were soldiers? Drugs, alcohol, organized crime operations that promise big payouts for the utilization of the very skills that those soldiers learned while fighting in Ukraine? All are possible, and Russia has seen something similar in the past. Returning veterans who served in the Afghan War that ended in 1989 came back to a collapsing Soviet Union that afforded many the opportunity to engage in gangsterism to such an extent that The Guardian claims that organized crime took over Russia in the 1990s. At least Putin doesn't have to worry as much about that, or does he? The rise of organized crime in Russia during the 1990s was directly linked to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Putin may think that he has more control than those former Soviet leaders, but the society he created is teetering close to a crash due to the Ukraine war. Disobedient soldiers, returning criminals, and the lack of loyalty we're already seeing in Ukraine may all come to bear precisely because the Russia to which those soldiers return will be ripe for the criminal taking. That's all thanks to Ukraine, which has broken something big in Russia. Putin is powerless to stop it, and his authoritarian regime is feeling the pressure like never before. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more examinations of the terrible state of the Russian military. And thank you for watching.